Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish begins with an insane story about a public execution, and then follows that up with another odd tale about a prison timetable. Foucault's Discipline and Punish is a challenging work. It can be pretty difficult, but its core message, its core argument is actually pretty straightforward. Let me explain. Super simply, Foucault's Discipline and Punish demonstrates to us that the way we punish criminals, the way we treat prisoners, changes over time. And Foucault argues if we track and explore those changes, we can learn an awful lot about our communities and about ourselves. So Discipline and Punish begins with the story of Damiens, a regicide. He attempted to assassinate King Louis XV in France in 1757. Now, Damiens' punishment for this attempted regicide is by any measure horrific. He is placed on a scaffold and flesh is first torn from his body with red-hot pincers. Then his wounds are filled with molten lead. And after that, his body is drawn and quartered, which means horses are tied to his arms and legs and then made to walk in opposite directions so that the horses literally pull his body apart. Yuck. Now, Foucault juxtaposes this story with another, and this is just a description of a schedule for prisoners written by Léon Fauché. It's a timetable which includes specific times for prisoners to work and pray. There are specific meal times, specific times when they need to wash their hands and face. So why does Michel Foucault begin Discipline and Punish with this juxtaposition? What is Foucault trying to say? One of the things Foucault wants to figure out is how we get from a time when we are literally tearing people apart in public as punishment to a period of time when people are punished through incarceration and maybe a kind of rehabilitation. What accounts for that transformation? We typically think we can understand the founding principles, the animating principles of a political community or a state by looking at things like founding documents, maybe like constitutions or maybe even famous political speeches. What Foucault argues in Discipline and Punish is that we might better understand these principles that animate communities if we examine how those communities treat lawbreakers, how we treat criminals. How punishment works in practice might tell us more about our values and our priorities. Foucault argued that punishment is one way by which sovereignty and subjects are constituted or delineated. And by sovereignty or sovereign, we just mean the ruler or the ruling office. And by subject, we just really mean the ruled. The public execution, then, has a juridico-political function. It is a ceremonial by which a momentarily injured sovereignty is reconstituted. Its aim is not so much to re-establish a balance as to bring into play the dissymmetry between the subject who has dared to violate the law and the all-powerful sovereign who displays his strength. So at the moment of punishment, rights and powers are clarified and defined. So in one sense, Foucault is really interested in punishment because as a site of investigation, it's really valuable. Because in these scenes, these sites of punishment or discipline, it's really clear who is powerful, who is not, who has social capital, who does not. All of those relationships and dynamics are laid bare. They're made very clear. So his proposition in a way is that we can look at something like a public execution and then we can move backwards, or we can almost reverse engineer our way into understanding something about the relationship between sovereign and subject, the rulers and the ruled. But, and this is really important, I think that's true of a public execution, but Foucault would argue the same is true analogously in our contemporary world when we're talking about something that we take to be ordinary, like house arrest or community service. Those kinds of punishments, those kinds of discipline, we can also reverse engineer our way back into understanding something about the way we conceive the relationship between sovereign and subject, ruler and ruled. So part of what Foucault is trying to show us is how have our modes of punishment, how have they developed, and how are they related to the rest of contemporary life? For instance, when we look at the transition between like violent public torture and our systems of incarceration and maybe ideas of rehabilitation, we might think that punishment has gotten more humane. Not that it's great, but that it's at least less violent, maybe less barbaric. We congratulate ourselves on our respect for human rights. But Foucault says, not so fast. Foucault says when we track these changes, when we attend to these changes in modes of punishment, what we really see is a substitution of objects. While Pre-modern or early modern punishment was really focused on the body. In the 18th and 19th centuries, punishment becomes more interested in the soul. So rather than some net increase in justice or mercy, Foucault says we ought to recognize just the substitution of objects, this greater concern with human psychology. So instead of actual physical bodily dismemberment, we now increasingly see these kinds of psychic vivisections, where courts and criminal justice systems are more concerned now with motive, with psychological or emotional causes. We're encouraged to subject prisoners or criminals to sometimes very public psychological scrutiny. We want them to lay bare their childhood traumas. We want to understand the criminal mind. And this development, Foucault says, reveals the way that power now wants to discipline us. This was what was at the core of that timetable at the beginning, right? The schedule for the prisoners was about building in them a certain kind of discipline, making them conform to a particular way of life. And Foucault also argues, and this is going to freak you out, that the connections he sees in prison systems or criminal justice systems, they're just more clearly visible versions of dynamics that we actually see in all sorts of fields of life, areas of human life. So the same dynamics are at play for those of us who are not lawbreakers. They're just harder to see. For example, does your school or workplace talk about mental health? They didn't used to. That's new. And listen, mental health is important. It's real. You should take care of your mental health. That is an important thing. But ask yourself, do these institutions, like workplaces, do they care about mental health because they care about your happiness and well-being? Or is their concern with mental health primarily about making sure that you continue to be productive? That you continue to conform to the mode of life they require to support existing power structures. So is the corporate or institutional concern with mental health actually about compliance and productivity? It's a troublesome thought, right? Now, one problem is that Foucault doesn't really have an account of justice, so we can't really get from his work some path by which we could arrive at criminal justice systems or disciplines that would be more fair or more just. He doesn't give us that. It's kind of a problem. But one thing that Foucault demonstrates through Discipline and Punish that is really valuable is that our modes of punishment, our criminal justice systems, are historically contingent. Things like prisons or police, we have not always had those. We have not always used those strategies to deal with lawbreaking. And if that's the case, if these things do emerge out of particular historical moments, it means we could change them. We could improve them or make them better, or even, as some people argue, abolish them. These institutions, these are policy choices, and we could make decisions to do things differently. My name is Dr. Andrew Moore. I teach great books at St. Thomas University, and if you enjoyed this video, or if you need more help understanding Foucault, and who doesn't, you should check out this video over here. Thanks very much. I'll talk to you soon.